All right, everybody, we just got the patch notes for the Season 11 PTR. Now, there is an insane amount of things that need to be covered from this for people to have a better understanding of what we're walking into in that PTR. And each one of those different topics, I'm just going to make its own little standalone video. There's masterworking changes, there's tempering changes, there's changes to like basically how everything in the game works, honestly. And a lot of these things, now that we have seen them on the public, now that it's here, a lot of these things are some of the stuff that myself, as well as other creators who had flown off to Blizzard, were privy to. And the thing that I'll say about it, because that's about as far as my NDA will let me talk about it, but the thing that I'll say about it is that I actually was not expecting a lot of these changes to be in one of these seasons. I thought all of this was for the expansion, not because that was expressed, but that was just kind of my understanding of it. And the fact that we're actually getting a lot of it here is incredibly exciting. One, the game that was going to be the game of my dreams in the future is a little bit closer here, which is really nice. But also, two, I'm glad that we're getting our hands on it now, because, again, this is a PTR. All of this is meant to be tested, right? So we're getting our hands on it now, iterate on it, make it better. By the time the expansion comes out, there's an even better base of a game for it to expand on. So that's why I'll leave those topics. I'll have the other videos coming out as soon as I can edit them. Sorry, I'm a one-man team. But that's not what you're here for, you dirty bird. You're a Necromancer main, and you want me to talk about the Necromancer meta shift in this season. And typically, I would have a giant Excel sheet for you where I would exactly attempt to guess where, walking into the PTR, what pit tiers every single build will be being able to accomplish, etc. And I gotta be honest with you, I can't provide that this time. What I'm going to do instead is talk about the Necromancer isolated in these patch notes and the various impacts of those changes on the ideas of the class. Why? Two major factors. One, walking out of Season 10 right now is the wildest gap between the base Necromancer class and what it's able to accomplish in the current season because of the Chaos Uniques and the seasonal perks that we got. There are builds that just quite literally won't exist anymore. There are builds that will now be much more meta relevant because the alternatives won't exist anymore. There are so many differences and so much wild power scaling that I think, for, as an example, Bloodlance alone. Bloodlance right now in Season 10 does something like 870% more damage than base Bloodlance does. And sure, I could calculate that, but what we don't know is how all of the changes in the Season 11 PTR are going to alter our itemization, how much power is on our gear, what we can afford to pick up in our Paragon, the relationship between additive damage and core stat, how multipliers will help to amplify all these things. And it would just be, honestly, it would be irresponsible for me to try to tell you what the meta will be and what pit tier they'll be clearing. Not only that, the pit isn't really what we're going to be caring about altogether that much because we're finally getting leaderboards with something called the Tower. And while those two things are interrelated, I think the focus of builds is going to be very different in this season. So let's just go ahead and talk about the things that are here, what I think the impact of them are, how I see their implementation, whether or not they are a good or a bad thing, and just what your general sense of the class should be walking into the PTR. What are the cool things to test? What are we going to be looking out for? Sounds good? All right, let's go ahead and get into it. And we're going to start off with the new unique that's being offered to the Necromancer, a unique mace of all things. And this dude gives you 3 little golems. A lot of people have been asking for this for a long time. So the stats on the weapon initially weren't particularly interesting to me, but the thing that I think we all have to recognize is that our characters are going to have less maximum life and less core stat because of the changes to masterworking, and you're seeing this across a lot of different items where percentage life is being replaced by flat life. So all of a sudden, a mace that has an implicit, which is 10% attack speed, which is nice, that's cap 1 attack speed for you and the golems. Intelligence and maximum life, which is probably now just required on a unique weapon. They were always good to have on a unique weapon, but now it seems like these two stats will just have to be on every single weapon going forward. And then you have what was basically the temper of Golem chance to hit twice, which sadly doesn't work with Mendel, and we'll talk about that just a little bit more in a quick second. And then Golem Mastery. This is really cool because any unique item can have greater affixes on these things. So this single weapon will get you up to 100% chance for Golem to hit twice. And then the main power is that your Golem is now 3 golems. Those golems are going to deal less damage, but now there's 3 of them, right? So if each one of them is dealing 60% damage, like if you have a max roll on this, that means that it's effectively an 80% damage multiplier for your golem. Because 3 golems hitting at 60% in effectiveness is 180, which is like your golem increasing its damage by 80. Now, that being said, 3 golems are going to trigger lucky hit chance 3 times as effectively as a single golem. This will also have some use cases where 3 golems, if you're using Bone Storm, will each have a Bone Storm on top of them. And the Bone Storm's damage doesn't scale off your golem's damage, it scales off of you. So it's okay that they're doing less damage. Now, that being said, using an entire aspect slot to effectively double the amount of Bone Storms that you can have may not necessarily cut the cake here, but what can you do? The other interesting things about the item is that it's also going to grant the golem 30% increased attack speed. My hope is that this is attack speed cap 2. Basically, minions can't cap attack speed cap 2 without sacrificing too much damage. This may help them go a really long way to be able to reach a total of 200% attack speed, which is something that we just realistically can't see on our minions currently. It also said that your golems respawn 50% faster. That's cool. Your golem doesn't die, so I don't really understand the purpose of that stat. I wish it was something else, or maybe it was your golems confer damage reduction to you, or something along those lines. Maybe their cooldown is shorter for their active ability, something more interesting along those lines that would actually matter, because this right now is mostly a dead stat. Having more minions in general is something that the class fantasy has really desired. Now, that being said, they have changed Kalan's Edict, the key passive, so there isn't a benefit to having more minions. And I think it's generally a good thing, but we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But as far as a weapon is concerned, this will define the golem-specific Necromancer build, which currently exists. You sacrifice everything other than your golems, and it is definitely the largest total amount of stats you could put onto this gear piece. I think it could go a little bit harder. I think it could be a little bit stronger, because in a different scenario, you could be tempering on like something like Finality or Titan's Fall, which kind of takes the place of the Golem Mastery ranks. The Golem hits twice. We already could be doing that, although tempering is different now, but that could be on an offhand or something like that. Since Golem hits twice doesn't really work with Mendeln, having more golems all triggering Mendeln is kind of cool. It's still the same increase in damage, as about an 80% increase in damage for that calculation. But since that doesn't interact with it, this is really about their base damage and their activation damage with Fell Gluttony. Big issue there is that on a Fell Gluttony build, you would often want to put that onto a two-handed weapon for the highest base damage. Although, and also since it now has a damage multiplier on it, this is fulfilling a weird spot for me. I would kind of prefer to see this as a ring other than a weapon, but if it is going to be a weapon, I kind of wish it was a two-handed weapon instead. I think that might be a bit more interesting here, and then bump up the stats on everything. It is very cool. Yes, we're going to be trying out a golem build, because having 3 is going to be better than having 1, and considering golem is going to move back into a skill slot for the general minion build, because you'll see one of the changes later on. I don't see this like being used with that, but it is something that you could do. And at the very least, since we have another minion-specific unique for the 3rd season in a row, hopefully people will stop asking me about Sanguivore, a weapon that isn't actually a minion build weapon. I think that's the biggest benefit here. Talking about Golem coming into the base minion build, they've made a change to the Book of the Dead section. So Golem, when you activate it and you target an enemy with it, will now force your skeleton mages and your skeleton warriors to target that enemy. That's right, we got minion targeting. Now you might notice that I don't have streamers going off behind me, I don't have a bottle of champagne, and I'm not, crying tears of joy. It's mostly because I think this sucks. And the saving grace that I currently have is that my understanding is basically this is like a soft launch. We're seeing what does it look like if you can target, and does this solve the problem? I don't believe that this solves the problem. And I'll explain it very succinctly. The best minion build currently is Hand of Naz Mages, which sacrifices the Golem. The best Golem build sacrifices all of your other minions. Using Golem and minions together really only makes sense if you're making a generic Mendeln procking build. And the major issue with that is that minion AI sucks so bad that without the Hand of Naz, your minions are just going to get stuck everywhere. Your minions being able to target an enemy is not the same thing as your minions being able to get over to that enemy. They do not have unhindered. Your golem gains unhindered, but they don't. So if targeting an enemy is just going to force all my skeletons to get stuck on the outside of a big pack of monsters, what does that really do? We really just need a button that says, when I click this, my minions attack that target. Not a skill on our bar, not an interface that ties it to a skill, not a specific basic skill, not clicking raise skeleton. It needs to be a new key input on your keyboard. It needs to be tilde. On a controller, it needs to be pressing in the right thumbstick to auto-target an enemy, which we already have in the game. That is what we need. Now, that being said, obviously we're going to explore this in the PTR. For a lot of people who don't care about what the meta build is, they're just excited to have all their minions running around. They're going to use that mace, have 3 golems. Also, what happens if all 3 golems target different things when you're playing on controller? I don't know. I'm going to stop being a Debbie Downer. It is very interesting. Also, the unstoppable duration increase from the golem activation is nice. 3 seconds of unstoppable is cool. The change to Bone Mages, this looks like a nerf. Just keep in mind, there's going to be a lot of stats out here that say like Fortify reduced. That's because they've changed the relationship between Fortify and your maximum life and what it accomplishes. So don't feel bad about that. It's basically across the board. It's just a rework as opposed to a nerf. Very awesome to see a reversion of the nerfs to Corpse Explosion. So while this just looks like a buff to Corpse Explosion used to do this much damage and it got nerfed. Somewhere around like season 3, I want to say it was. And sorry, I sound so nasally. I haven't really been sleeping. I'm not sick. I sound sick. Sorry. Regardless, though, this reversion to Corpse Explosion puts it back to its original base damage. This is roughly a 30% increase in damage. I don't believe that this really moves the needle or solves the issue of Corpse Explosion, which is that you can't generate corpses fast enough. There was also a nerf to its lucky hit chance. It used to be 40%, now it's 20%. I would love to see a reversion of that as well, and maybe let Corpse Explosion experience its previous glory, which was a decent build. Its previous glory was, it used to be a pretty decent build, and I would like to see that again. There has been a cap put on Bone Spirit that says it will only consume 500 essence. You may think, like, 1, if you're in the know, you never got up to 500 essence, but 2, you might think that this is a nerf, and it isn't. This is actually all because they changed the Melted Heart of Selig, which I think is going to see a lot of different use and was my first thought when I looked at the changes. But basically, the Melted Heart of Selig is going to increase your maximum resource by a huge percentage based off of how much core stat you have. And that was going to get us up to like 1,000 essence. So this is a cap on it now. But that being said, Melted Heart of Selig, which used to be considered one of the best in slot options for a Bone Spirit build because of the maximum resource it had way back in the day, may very well make its way onto a Bone Spirit build. It's actually going to be pretty cool to check it out, I think. Kalan's Edict is seeing a pretty big change. Basically, regardless of the number of minions that you have, they now gain 40% attack speed and 40% damage. They continue to have this weird thing that says when a minion dies, the rest enrage. The only way to trigger this is by casting and then canceling a Bone Prison. I really don't understand what this thing is. Your minions just don't die. I would like to see that functionality baked back into, like, maybe when your minions kill an enemy, they enrage. There we go. I solved it. Solved it for you. It makes it better for clear. Makes it good against bosses that have ads. Dude, literally, hire me, Blizzard. Hire me. I got it in one. But no, this is a really, really good change because you get to use it on a golem build where you have a single or now 3 golem. You get to use it on a build where it's, just the Reaper minions where you only had 7 of them. This is a really nice change. I like to see it. My major issue with it is that the Necromancer doesn't have any way of scaling summon damage. Now, I know nobody else cares about this but me, but basically, remember that Blade of Sangravor I made fun of and I said, stop asking me about it? That thing does summon damage and increases summon damage. An Army of the Dead is a summoning skill, not a minion skill. So Army of the Dead, the minion ultimate skill, can't use Kalan's Edict because it's not minions, it's summons. So I would like Kalan's Edict to say that your summons gain 40% attack speed and your summons gain 40% increased damage. And when your summon kills a target, they are enraged and deal 20% more damage. And now this could work for a lot of different things that it previously couldn't. Oh, and we could use the Keh rune, which makes those spirit wolves. Hell yeah, brother. Imagine having an entire army of little spirit wolves with you as well. I'd really like to see that change. We're seeing a buff to Supernatural Bloodsurge, which if you didn't see my most recent Bloodsurge video from a week or so ago, it's actually doing a lot better than we expected. It's able to clear like pit tier 100 in season 10, which isn't high, but it's insanely high for Bloodsurge. But we're seeing a buff to the damage bonus that you get from this. So as opposed to 50% damage, it's now 65% damage. So that's pretty massive. One of the issues here, though, is that apparently there's a bug where the second Bloodsurge from the Blood-Bathed aspect was getting this damage bonus twice. So it was slightly overperforming the expected damage output. So this will probably end up leaving us feeling roughly the same, but it is nice that because they're potentially because there was that bug, they still bumped this up even further, which I do like. Bloodsurge still needs a ton of love, also Bloodlance, and I'm kind of sad not to see anything here about that. This change to aspect of Hungry Blood, I'm not exactly sure what it means or why it matters. So Bloodlance used to say when it hit a target that was Bloodlanced, shoot out another Bloodlance. Now it says Bloodlance shoots out another Bloodlance when it hits an enemy. So it starts triggering one attack sooner than it did previously. We just don't use Hungry Blood, because why would we? We have Gore Quills and we can't fit on any other aspects that also say Bloodlance proliferates lances. Maybe I'm missing something where... No, I got nothing. We don't use Hungry Blood, so I don't really know what this is supposed to accomplish. But it is nice that it's slightly faster, so that's cool. We do need to talk about Indira's Memory. Indira's Memory has always had a really interesting relationship, where it says two different skills do two different things now, and it inherently tied a damage multiplier to the casting of Blood Wave on a build called Bone Spear that you really wouldn't want to ever use Blood Wave on, because you would just want to be using stronger multipliers or utility or effects from other ultimates. The downside to this change, which is basically that they remove the Blood Wave part altogether. It is just Bone Spear now deals additional damage and is a blood skill, and will launch another Bone Spear by consuming a corpse, and it will drain you of your maximum life. They took out the Blood Wave component to it entirely, because if you remember, Indira's was released with Keseme's, which were both Blood Wave pants. One said Blood Wave is now a bone skill, one said Blood Wave now deals double damage and hits on top of you as opposed to push things away. One of them was strictly better. Now, funnily enough, in this season, we have been recommending the 3-tag Indira's Memory version of Blood Wave, because it's just so much more fun to play with Alter the Balance without having to pick up Blood Orbs to overpower, because base Blood Wave feels so heinously bad now in the game. And I think that in this PTR, if there are some Blood Wave enjoyers, we really need to get a lot of great feedback about Blood Wave, because without Alter the Balance and without Indira's Memory, we're going to go back to picking up the 2 blood orbs that get dropped and then having to wait with the cooldown of Title and then overpower from it. And if you don't get enough blood orbs, it doesn't reset the cooldown and you don't overpower, and then you don't do damage and it feels like crap. And then everybody's always confused. And then sometimes the blood orbs get eaten because you cast it in a hallway, so it wasn't wide enough to spawn them. It's just an awful gameplay experience. It's like truly unfun and unplayably bad as far as I'm concerned. That's why I don't recommend it. So if we could get that feedback into the devs' hands, it's not just me whining. You know, more noise in the general ecosystem tends to get results. That's something to test for sure. And then the last thing to talk about, a change to one of the glyphs that we're basically recommending on every single build, which is called Gravekeeper. Gravekeeper grants a damage bonus to targets that are healthy. And it's now going to also grant a damage bonus to targets that are injured. So just to kind of, represent that a little bit here, let's look at it. Gravekeeper, I promise, I'm literate. So Gravekeeper gives you a huge multiplier to your rare nodes, and then it grants you 18% damage scaling if you have 6 corpses around you, which you kind of always do unless you're playing Blood Spear and Corpse Explosion and Bloodsurge in particular. And then it grants you a 20% damage multiplier versus healthy enemies. Healthy enemies are only for the first 20% of their maximum life. But looking at the math of it, sometimes people don't quite understand why we use Gravekeepers. So the first part, if we assume that there are 6 corpses, that's an 18% damage multiplier, and then 20% for 20% of their life. So that is a 1.18 multiplier. And then this is equal to 1 plus 0.2 multiplied by 0.2. So the first part is an 18% damage multiplier. The second part, on average, over the length of a monster's life, is only a 4% damage multiplier. And that being said, if you one-shot a monster, it's a 20% damage multiplier. And the longer a fight goes on, the weaker this damage bonus becomes. But since we can always consider averages as the amount of life that they apply over, multiplying these things together gets you a total of a 22.72% damage multiplier. Any other generic glyph grants you a 10% damage multiplier and a 10.4% multiplier. So if you were to do that same math, it's very slightly underperforming Gravekeeper. That's the kit and caboodle what you need to understand there. But with this change, we're actually getting more damage out of it because it reapplies once they hit injured, and injured is 35% of their life. Meaning that this glyph is actually available over a total of 55% of the monster's life, meaning that Gravekeeper is without question our best glyph on every single build, no matter what. It is insane. A 31% total damage multiplier from a glyph is actually nutty. So this is just huge. This is just really nice. It basically means that you can Zerg through their healthy status really quickly, which helps to activate things like the Ahu rune and getting Essence Glyph online, because both those required that the target is no longer healthy. And then at the end of a fight, we actually re-ramp our damage, and it's actually even higher than it was before because it's effective over a longer period of time. So that's really cool. I like that change. I want to like take a quick second to like reset some expectations walking into this season, because all of your favorite builds from season 10 basically don't work in season 11, and we're going to have to go back to playing normal versions of builds, which I don't think is a bad thing. But I do think a lot of people, especially who are walking in for their first season I have so many people who have told me that like this is their first time playing Necromancer, first time playing Diablo 4. They played the Shadowblight build and they loved it, or they played the Bone Spirit build and they loved it, or they played the new Reap minions and they loved it. None of those builds work that way outside of this season. So let's go ahead and talk about them. For our endgame builds, basically everything is going to look different. Bone Spirit, we'll just go in order here. Bone Spirit is going to look very different because right now it is the Shattered Spirit version where we do all of our damage via Bone Splinters. We scale basic skill damage. We use things like Pain Gorgers here. Where's Pain Gorgers? There we go. We use Pain Gorgers to proliferate even more damage. We use the Gospel of Devotee so that they all pierce without the inclusion of very specifically Unstable Power, which says that your basic skills crit and overpower and deal double damage. Shattered Spirit will no longer be able to scale anywhere near to the current rate that it does. Without them overpowering, without getting the double damage bonus, without getting the triple damage bonus, you know, on top of Brown over Brains here, and the lack of support of scaling basic skill damage, Shattered Spirit isn't going to be useless, but it's going to be doing a 100th of its current damage. So the Bone Spirit build itself will go back to doing Bone Spirit. And Bone Spirit is generally pretty powerful. It also gets to overpower 100% of the time. It actually looks a lot cooler. The major issue is that it becomes much more of like a targeted single target damage skill. So running the pit where you pull everything in really tightly, put them into a bone prison, and then spam a shotgun skill into them. Very efficient. But it's bad for all other content. I know. It sucks. There's a universe where the Shattered Spirit version of this build continues to be fairly decent for things like the hordes and speed farming scenarios. Bone Spear is one of the builds using Alter the Balance, and the gearing for it was incredibly rigorous. It was very difficult to be able to put this build together, but it was basically constantly spamming Spear and an alt and shooting out megatons of spears and doing a huge amount of damage and overpowering really efficiently due to this because of how many damage instances that there were. Blood Spear is going to continue to exist. It looks like they're really dipping into healing mechanics in Season 11. So I think it's going to get a lot of tools for healing, which is what it needed to offset the loss of life from Indira's. And that being said, it's going to lose a lot of power. It's not going to be that spammy. It's going to be a lot simpler to pilot, but its damage output is probably going to be fairly reduced. When you go back to the base version of the build, it's just a single spear that's double firing, which is still very cool. You still get all the extra ones from Indira's, etc. But by losing out on this Chaos perk, it's a very different beast entirely. Sever Necromancer, completely unaffected. Nothing is different here. Blight Necromancer, completely unaffected. Nothing is different here. Bloodlance, completely unaffected. Nothing is different here. It's just super weak. So that's why I would like to see some added scaling to it and some buffs walking out of this PTR, because I think a lot of our builds are going to be feeling pretty bad, and Bloodlance is at the bottom of that list. Similarly, Bloodsurge is wildly more powerful due to the ability to use Chaos Uniques and overpower significantly more. The big difference with this build, if you look at the pit pushing version of it that I made, basically is able to trigger the Zan rune and the Cax rune very efficiently. But it's mostly because we had Fists of Fate and we had a huge amount of damage scaling from Lidless Wall. When you take all of these things back off of it, it loses a lot of its damage. It loses its ability to trigger Lucky Hit Chance to a significant degree. So overall, it's just a bit weaker. We may need to use the Paranormal Bloodsurge to be able to overpower more often by picking up Blood Orbs. Maybe that's still not required, and we can continue to use the Supernatural Bloodsurge, which is the one that grants it the huge damage multiplier. But this build, while it's not functionally different, is just weaker. And I think that this fall from grace is going to be a bit of a wake-up call for the balance of the class. Minion Necromancer. Now this depends on which version of Minion Necromancer you're playing. The good, fun one or the most powerful one. So the regular version of Minions is using Hand of Nas and Mages. It already had swapped back over to using Ring of Mendeln because the bugs that made the Mages do the majority of the damage from Season 9 had been fixed. So that build, fully functional. Yes, it gained some damage this season. Every build did from being able to stack on a bunch of Chaos Uniques. But it's good. It's still a good build, really solid, losing absolutely nothing. The Reap version of this, which was using the Chaos Power Grim Reapers, which said that your Skeleton Warriors could cast Reap, goes away. So we no longer have a basic skill build for this setup. Now that being said, you can also already be building Bone Mages. Bone Mages scale physical damage, which means that you could dip slightly more efficiently into physical damage along with the Ring of Mendeln, which is an interesting thing to consider, which might be something that we look into in the next season. Bloodwave, we already kind of talked about Bloodwave. But basically, Bloodwave right now is 3-tag Bloodwave using Indiras because it's just a significantly better playstyle than the more classic version of Bloodwave. This is going away, so won't that version of the build. So we're going to go back to Tidal and Kesemes and dealing with picking up the Blood Orbs and dealing with cooldown reduction, and that sucks. Yeah, that's it. Very powerful build, just wholly unfun to play. And then my beautiful, beloved Shadowblight. Shadowblight will continue to be an incredibly strong build. Shadowblight was already one of our strongest builds in Season 9. What it won't have is the great speed farming potential that it currently does, and you'll have to be clicking a lot more buttons and caring about a lot more things. The reason why all of that is true is obviously because of Alter the Balance again. This allowed us to spam Soul Rift and modified the effective Soul Rift that made it an incredible engine for triggering Shadowblight. In the base version of Shadowblight, you generate a few corpses and then you spam Corpse Explosion, and it's very slightly under the total DPS output of the Alter the Balance version. Thing that is the problem is that it isn't a bunch of Soul Rifts standing on top of you, and Soul Rift doesn't require any setup. You just spam cast the skill. With Corpse Explosion, you have to generate corpses. Its area of effect is much smaller. Monsters have to stay within the Corpse Explosion. Still very strong. Still great for bossing, still great for pit pushing, will definitely be good for the tower. Where it won't be good is in speed farming like open world content and the Helltide and Infernal Hordes. It will feel pretty bad in those content types. And there's nothing really to do about it. It's just not great for those things because it is a small area setup skill, which means it has to ramp its damage. I'll include a link to the patch notes just so you can check them out yourself. Like I said, there's a huge amount of changes coming to all of the base systems that I think people are going to really have to sit down and chew through to get a full understanding of what the impact is. What does the game look like? I think it's all for the better. It's taking away a huge amount of really frustrating RNG. Item progression feels better. Minimum power of items feels better. Changing over items to have 4 affixes and only 1 temper. Affixes on gear is typically significantly stronger than tempers, unless we're talking about a weapon. So that's just like items in general have redistributed where their power comes from, and it's more likely to get more power on items, which is really good. But there's also downsides with all of this. 4 affixes on a piece of gear means that you can have 3 passive amulets. And if you don't have a 3 passive amulet, you can't compete with somebody who does have a 3 passive amulet. Maybe we just take passives away for amulets. How cool would that be? I'm pre-tired. I'm pre-exhausted of people being like, damn, dude, I don't have a 4 GA 3 passive intelligence percentage amulet. My build is trash. Like, oh, wowie. Oh, I just sent shiver up my spine thinking about that. People can just buy this crap with RMT. It's going to be so frustrating. But that's for another topic of another day. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, ideas, things that you're excited about in this PTR, what you're looking to test, what build you're looking to test, let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. This is one of the few times where we get to interface before a thing comes out. And I generally find that talking with my community in this way, we get a lot of really good, like idea juice flowing. And that makes what we test in the PTR so much better. There's a link to my Discord in the description if you want to go hang out with us there as well. That's just a better place to kind of categorize and keep all this information in one tidy place because YouTube comments are like the Wild West, man. But there you go. That's enough of me yapping. I truly, truly hope that this video helped, and I look forward to seeing you in the Season 11 PTR.